All right, today we are looking at fractions and decimals, and this is lesson 4-5 out of your textbook. Our learning targets for today, make sure you write these down, are I can write fractions as a decimal, I can write mixed numbers as a decimal, and I can write decimals as fractions. All right, so our think icon here tells us we got some things that we want to think about before moving on in our lesson. What do you know about our number system? And think about, what is our number system based on? Okay? And so it might help you to think about place value. Think about the place value and how our number system works. And it actually, if we look down here, our decimal system is based on powers of tens. So if we look at our place value chart here, we have our decimal point. And you notice, I'm going to zoom in here, you notice that we have the ones place, and then we have the tenths, which lines up with the tens on the other side. We have the hundredths, which line up with the hundreds on the other side. And the thousandths on one side line up with the thousands on the other side. Oops. Okay, so I want you to think, how will this help us with converting fractions and decimals? Okay, in order to show those equivalent numbers in different forms. So going back and forth from a fraction to a decimal, how will our number system of the powers of tens help us or make it easier for us? Here we are looking at writing what we read using place value. So we are given some words here and we want to write them in both fraction and decimals. So our first example is, when we read it, it reads as 7/10. Okay, and since we've been working a lot with decimals, I'm going to start with that one. So the tenths we know is the first spot after to the right of our decimal. So I'm going to put in my decimal, and I'm going to drop in a 7 in the tenths place. All right. Now for a fraction, that 7 tells us our numerator, and the tenths tells us our denominator. So we have 7 in the numerator, and tenths, 10 is our denominator. For the next one, 30 hundredths is what we read. So our decimal, we're in the hundredths place. So we are going to be, starting with the 3 and the hundredths, which is the second spot after the decimal. So that will be 30 hundredths. Okay. The next one, oops, we have to do the fraction for it. So 30 again tells us our numerator, and the hundredths tells us that we have 100 in our denominator. Okay, now this one I'm going to start with the fraction first and go to the decimal next. So we read it as 265 thousandths. So our first part here, 265, that's our numerator, 265. And the thousandths tells us our denominator, our bottom number, which is 1,000. Okay, just like that. Now for our decimal, we write that as 265, and we are ending in the hundredth or the thousandths place. Okay? Now, if the denominator, the bottom number of a fraction, is a factor or a number that can multiply into 10, 100, or 1,000, or any higher power of 10, so 10,000, 100,000, so on and so forth, you can use mental math and place value to convert. Okay? And this little picture here is just showing us what we talked about. Our 25 hundredths goes into the numerator, the hundredths place goes into our denominator. All right, we are using mental math to write each fraction or mixed number as a decimal. So looking at 7/20 or 7/20ths, we need to get this denominator. I look at it and I know that 20 can go into 100 by multiplying by 5. I'm going to zoom in here. All right, and whatever I do to the bottom number, I also have to do to the top number. 7 times 5 is 35. 20 times 5 is 100. So now we have 35 hundredths. And if we were to write that as a decimal, it would look like that because we are ending in the hundredths place. So 35 hundredths. Okay. Now looking at this one, 5, this one's a mixed number, so we have a whole number and a fraction. And our whole number is 5, our fraction is 3/4, so we would read that as 5 and 3/4, just like with decimals, with that decimal point was our and, so the break here is our and as well. So first I'm going to look at this 3/4. We need to get that denominator to be to be 10, 100, 1,000, something like that. And I know 4, we can multiply it by 25 to get 100, so I multiply the top by 25 as well. 3 times 25 is 75. 4 times 25 is 100. So now our mixed number is 5 and 75 hundredths. So if we read it that way, our 5 is in the ones place, and we would drop our decimal, 75 hundredths. Okay? Try these next 3 on your own, and then we will go through them together. 3/10, well, we can multiply 10 times 10 and multiply the top by 10 as well. 3 times 10 is 30. 10 times 10 is 100. I'm sorry, you could do this, and you would end up with this as a decimal, 30 hundredths. Okay. Now, it's already, if we look at the 3/10, it's already in our denominator is in the power of a 10. So 3/10, we know it's in the tens place, the first spot after the decimal, so it would look like that. Okay, but if you did do it into a multiple of 100, that would work as well. Our next one, 3/25. 25 can multiply by 4 to get us to 100. 3 times 4 is 12, so we have 12 hundredths, which written as a decimal looks like that. Okay. Next one, 6 and 1/2. Let's look at this 1/2. We could get that into our denominator to be 10 by multiplying by 5 on the top and bottom. So we would have 6 and 5/10. So our whole number is in the ones place, is 6. And we drop our decimal, 5 in the tenths place, so 6 and 5/10. Now, any number can be written as a decimal. We showed before using the mental math, so getting our denominators to be in those powers of 10, 100, or 1,000, so on and so forth. But some of them aren't going to work that way, so in order to turn these fractions into decimals, you would divide the numerator by the denominator. And so make sure to note that your division ends when the remainder is 0. So we never write a remainder, or we don't write a remainder and then something. We keep dividing until we get 0. Okay? So we take the numerator, divide by the denominator, okay, which means that our denominator goes outside of our division box. Numerator goes inside. All right, so we look at this. 8 cannot fit into 3. So now if we add a 0 to this, okay, we have to make sure to put a decimal in so we are not changing the value of this number at all. By adding that 0, we are still have a number of 3. And we carry this decimal up above. Okay? And now we can divide like normal. Since 8 doesn't go into 3, we'll look 8 goes into 30 3 times. 8 times 3 is 24. 30 minus 24 is 6. Now we have a left remainder of 6, so we add a 0. 8 goes into 67 times. 7 times 3 is 56. Do our subtraction. Okay, we still have numbers, remainders, so we keep adding zeros. 8 goes into 40 5 times. 5 times 8 is 40. Now we have a remainder of 0, so we are done. So 3/8 written as a decimal is going to be 375 thousandths. So that is how it looks as a decimal. Our next one, 1/40th. Again, the denominator, this bottom number, goes outside of our division bracket. The numerator goes inside. 40 does not fit into 1, so we add our decimal and a 0. Bring the decimal point straight up above. 40 does not fit into 10, so we add another 0. Carry this 0 up here because it doesn't fit in there at all. 40 fits into 100 2 times. 2 times 40 is 80. Do our subtraction. 100 minus 80 is 20. Add another 0. 40 fits into 20 5 times. 5 times 40 is 200. Do your subtraction, and we have 0, so that is where we stop once we finally get a remainder of 0. So this fraction, 1/40th, can be written as a decimal as 25 thousandths, since we are in the thousands place. All right, there's a few for you to try and then come back and check your work. First one here, 7/8. Again, denominator goes outside the division bracket. 8 does not fit into 0, or into 7, sorry, so I add a 0, bring my decimal up. 8 goes into 78 times, which is 64. Do my subtraction, which is 6. Add a 0. Goes in there 7 times, which is 56. Do my subtraction, which is 4. Add another 0. 8 goes into 40 5 times. Remainder of 0. So 7/8 can be written as 875 thousandths. Okay. Next one, 2 1/8. For now, I'm going to ignore the whole number, our 2, and I'm just going to focus on that fraction. Okay. 8 can't go into 1, so I add my decimal with a 0. Goes in there 1 time, which is 8. 10 minus 8 is 2. Goes in there 2 times, which is 16. Add another 0. 8 goes into 40 5 times, which is 40. Remainder of 0. Okay. So 2 1/8 written as a decimal, well, our whole number stays 2, and we just found that the 1/8 is written as 125 thousandths. So there is our answer. 7 9/20. Again, I'm going to not worry about my whole number right now. I'm just going to do my division. 20 can't go into 9, so I add my decimal and a 0. Make sure to bring the decimal straight up above. 20 fits into 90 4 times, which is 80. Do my subtraction, add another 0. 20 fits into 100 5 times. Remainder of 0, so that is where we stop. So 7 9/20 written as a decimal. 7 stays the same. We found out that 9/20 is written as 45 hundredths, and there is our final answer. All right. Some vocab here for you to think about. Terminating decimals. Okay. that terminating means end, so it's when the decimal comes to an end, or the decimal ends. Okay, whereas repeating decimals, these are decimals, that do not end, or they keep going on and on and on. Okay, so these are going to be our decimals like 33333, and so on, and it keeps going. Okay, or if it does something like 4 5 4 5 4 5, and it just keeps going. Okay, now there's a certain way that we write these decimals with something called bar notation, where we see that it starts repeating itself and it continues to go forever and ever. We just draw it with this bar notation, this bar written over the digits that repeat. So for 0.33333, we just can write 3/10 with the bar notation over it. Or our next one here, notice how it repeats 1 2 1 2 1 2. Well, we can write 1 2 with our bar notation over the top. So that's how we show repeating decimals. All right, so we are going to practice writing 7/9 as a decimal. We are going to do our division here. 9 can't fit into 7, so we add our decimal and a 0. Goes into 70 7 times, which is 63. Do our subtraction. Now we got 7, so we don't stop there. We add a 0. 9 goes into 70 7 times, which is 63. Do our subtraction. We get 7. Goes in there 7 times, which is 63. And we notice we are getting the same numbers each time, which is telling us that it is repeating. After we see that trend, we can stop and write this as a repeating decimal. Okay, so we look and see where is our decimal repeating. Well, the 7 is the part that's repeating, the 7/10. So we put down our 7. We draw our bar notation over the 7, which is telling us that that is what is repeating. Okay. Here's some for you to practice on your own. Come back and check. 2/3. We do our division for. Okay, it can't go into 2, so we make it add our decimal and a 0. Goes into 26 times, which is 18. Do our subtraction. We keep doing our division. Okay, and we start to notice there's a trend here that keeps repeating. So we can write this as a repeating decimal. We see that the 6 that is repeating, so we draw that with our bar notation. Okay, so 2/3 written as a decimal is 6/10 repeating. 3/11. Okay. See how many times 11 goes into 3? Well, it doesn't, so we add our decimal and a 0. 11 goes into 30 2 times. 11 times 2 is 22. Okay, do our long division here. Okay, keep adding zeros. And if you notice, we start repeating, getting the same trend. So we know this is going to be a repeating decimal. So we can write this with our bar notation. We look and see what part is repeating. Well, it's going 2 7 2 7, and it will keep going 2 7. So we write down the 2 7. Now both of those are repeating back and forth. So we draw our bar notation over both the 2 and the 7, because that is telling us that both of those are repeating. So 3/11 written as a decimal is 27 hundredths repeating. Our next one, 8 1/3. Again, I'm going to not worry about the 8 right now. I'm just going to worry about my 1/3, writing that as a decimal. Okay, do my long division. And you're start noticing we have a repeating pattern here. Okay, so 1/3 written as a decimal, we could say is 3/10 repeating. So we put that bar notation over the 3, that's where it's repeating. And the 8, our whole number in the one spot, stays the same. So 8 1/3 is written as 8 3/10 as a decimal. Remember, you can always go back and re-watch the video if you are still a little confused. You can look at your book for some examples, and there are some tutor videos in the book online. Go ahead and go take your NICU quiz for this now, and make sure that your notes come back to school tomorrow.